Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Thanos Davelis. This year has kicked off already with unprecedented deadly wildfires in California, has seen the European Union's Copernicus program recently issue warnings about drought conditions and the risk of wildfires across Europe. And data shows that there's a strong chance 2025 could be the second warmest year on record. What does this mean for Greece, though, especially as it prepares for another summer season, on alert as the dangers of wildfires and rising temperatures loom? Costas Synolakis, Niko Efstathiou, and Erika Spagakou join me today as we dig into this question. Guys, great to have you on. Costa, we'll pass the first question over to you. Costa, with wildfires in California, your home state, setting the stage for 2025, should we be bracing for another difficult summer, especially in countries like Greece?
Yes, California and Greece have a lot in common. They have the same, dry Mediterranean climate conditions, and they're both very, very much affected by wildfires that are, driven, or they have increased intensity and increased incidence due to climate change. In California, we're facing a particularly difficult challenge because it has been a very wet year in some areas, almost 40% above normal, while in other areas it has been extremely dry. Why? I should explain why we worry about particularly wet conditions. Is because this makes the vegetation grow faster, and we have more fuel for the fires. We're going to be facing similar conditions in Greece. Greece the estimates are that we're going to have the hottest June on record, probably hotter than the June we had last year. And these are very ripe conditions for wildfires. We don't really have any. It's really very, very hard to make guesses as to the intensity of the winds. I want to remind everyone that what really was the problem in Southern California in January, it was the intensity of the wind. The wind speeds, which ranged all the way up to 60 miles per hour, and they persisted for several days. And pretty much, the fires in California, they started putting them out when the wind died down. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in June in Greece, but we do know that as the temperature in Greece increases, as the temperatures increase, what we see in Greece, most of the winds are thermal, they're seasonal. So with increases in temperature, increases in the temperature of the of the sea, we're going to get probably stronger winds than what we're used to.
Niko, I want to turn to you. The past few summers have seen major and destructive wildfires in Greece, and you've been covering and researching wildfires and the response to them, especially in the media at the Reuters Institute now. Do you see this becoming a regular feature of the summer, one that Greeks have to factor in, that's really affecting kind of the psychology of Greeks more so than anything?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Thanos. And we have to look at this not just as a seasonal thing anymore, but also as a phenomenon that extends beyond what we know as wildfire season. You had a California wildfires way outside the US regular wildfire season. We had a wildfire in Israel that took place recently outside of what was normally the seasonal wildfire, period where authorities were more alert. So there's an undeniable reality here. Climate is making the conditions for wildfires to happen more frequently and to spread faster and more unpredictably. That being said, 90% of wildfires are caused by the human element, whether that is accidental or intentional. And so it's this complex equation, even for the media to cover, where we need to talk about the climate link that is making them more frequent and more destructive. But there's also a spark. There's always something that can start the fire. There are natural fires, about 10% of them. But in response to people's fears and anxieties, I think journalism has to do a diligent job at explaining the uncertainty, looking at the conditions for the wildfires, and something I want to get into later, looking at the preventative measures as well. What can we do before the fire even starts? And also what do we do after a region has been affected by a wildfire?
I think that's the perfect pass over to Erika there. Erika, beyond accepting that each summer now comes with a high risk of wildfires, there are also a number of Greeks, yourself and the team at Ecogenia included, who are mobilizing at the civic level to do something about it. What's your viewpoint? What's your viewpoint from the field as you're, working, let's say, in an area that may have had a wildfire that passed through it, or on preventative measures?
Absolutely. Thank you, Thanos, very much. It's absolutely true that wildfires have unfortunately become a predictable part of our summers in Greece. But from where I stand, there's also good news. There's a growing sense of determination, not just acceptance, but determination. At Ecogenia, we've seen firsthand how young people, in particular, are responding to that and stepping up and saying, this is not enough. We want to be part of the solution. Our work at Ecogenia centers around creating a youth climate corps and specifically working around prevention. And I think we're going to get into it in a bit. But what is a climate corps? A structured civic service model that trains and deploys young people in local communities to work on wildfire preparedness, trail maintenance, and awareness campaigns for the community, which is very, very important as well.
So for our American audience, this would be something like an AmeriCorps or California Conservation Corps.
Exactly. It's inspired by those models precisely and adapted to the Greek context, where there's been a gap between national plans and local capacity, and it's really responding to these challenges very well. So what we have found is that there's no shortage, to answer your question, of willingness from civil society and citizens. The challenge is creating the right infrastructure to harness that energy consistently and meaningfully, especially outside of crisis moments, so at the prevention state. And that's where we come in. We provide training, coordination, and partnerships with the public sector to leverage the power of young people to respond to those challenges in a proactive manner. And while the field conditions can be tough, through limited resources, bureaucracy, fragmentation, we've also seen incredible results where local government, civil society, and youth come together in the end with a shared purpose. That's what gives me personally hope, not the work we've done, but that the momentum is really building across Greece.
Well, if I can jump in about something that Niko said, I couldn't agree more about how, 90% of the fires probably are anthropogenic. Well, the one thing that in Greece is not really, people really don't understand is how often fires are sparked by power lines. We know that, in the Altadena fire, in the recent Los Angeles fires, the fire was sparked by, near a utility, from power lines, in one of these, utility towers. The fire in Pacific Palisades was probably sparked, in someone's backyard. We know the Paradise fire in Northern California in 2018 was sparked by utility lines. The utility, the PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, filed for bankruptcy because of the amounts that they had to pay as compensation for those fires. And we also know that the fire in Lahaina in Maui last year in August 20. It was actually August 2023. It was not last year. That was the fire was triggered by probably power lines. Creating sparks in heavy wind. And this is something that Greece and the utility companies, they have to really address in terms of mitigating the risk when you have high winds from sparking fires accidentally.
Well, Costas, it sounds like there's a direct link here between, let's say, urbanization and some of these wildfires. And I think you've laid it out that this is one of the reasons there in the California wildfires. We've seen wildfires in Greece just last year where the proximity of the fire to homes and urban centers was very alarming. As cities grapple with the challenges then of rising temperatures, is this the new challenge that's emerging? How to deal with this urban wildlife intersection right there?
Right. In the business we call it the WUI, the wildland urban interface, and in fact this is it's very well said, Thano. This is the new frontier. The problem is that it's not that the forests are encroaching on the cities. I mean, the cities and communities are encroaching inside the urban, inside forests, inside the wildland. So the possibility to have conflagration increases substantially. We saw this what happened in as I said, in Pacific Palisades in the January 2025 fires in California, where basically something starts out of someone's backyard and immediately, I mean, what you have is exactly because it's so close to the wildland, coupled with very, very strong winds, the fire picks up, and then it's basically it becomes out of control very, 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 very quickly. So this is something. In fact, this is the hardest area to really fight fires, the fires, because I mean all the firefighting power that we have. I mean, if you take away the firefighting aircraft, I mean, there's different fire engines that are for forest fires, different fire engines that are for urban fires, and then when you have a fire exactly at the intersection of the wildland urban interface, sometimes the firefighters may not have the right equipment, depending on whether they're fighting the forest fire or a building fire, house fire. I mean, it may be quite different. So this is really a new frontier. And as I said, what we found out in Los Angeles was that even with all the firefighting power, this is Cal Fire, probably the best equipped fire department in the nation, and still it couldn't put out this fire. So this is really food for thought.
Well, Erika, I want to turn back to you, because as wildfires become more of a threat to urban centers, we're also seeing a global trend, not just in Greece, of urbanization. So this issue, is also presenting challenges, obviously on the urban front. But how do you see it impacting the efforts that you're working on, for example, in mitigation, especially in areas like Litochoro, which is a village that's hours away from the closest urban center, maybe Thessaloniki, and especially Athens?
Yeah, the work that has to be done in an urban setting is different. In a rural area, especially so close to a national park, has its own challenges. What we're doing in the mountain in Litochoro is precisely focusing on prevention, which I mentioned earlier as well, and it's about really reducing the wildfire risks that there are on the outskirts of the community, but also within the limits of the national park, and working very closely with the local stakeholders, with the local forestry service, the local authorities, the municipality, to remove the risks, the hazards for the wildfires, but also to work with the community through community engagement programs to educate, disseminate information, and support the local authorities in the work they're doing, so that really we can start seeing a behavioral shift from communities where wildfire prevention doesn't become an issue, of the authorities and of the state alone, but where the community understands its civic responsibility towards taking care to mitigate the hazards ahead of wildfire season. It becomes really an issue for all of us to work together around it.
Well, Erika, what I want to dig into here and follow up on is, as we see this trend towards urbanization, more and more people are leaving the countryside for cities. Does this present a unique challenge for you, let's say, in an area that's trying to work on, like a place like Mount Olympus or other remote areas of Greece?
Well, through our program, we are able to, respond to some of these challenges. We are really mobilizing young people and bringing them from all over the country and bringing them to areas that face such challenges. We train them and help them to work with the local community to really, create impact that's local and hence sustainable. Because, you have to act locally for your impact to be long-term and sustained, and work with the community that hosts you. So I wouldn't necessarily, obviously there's more human resources in an urban center, in a bigger environment, but there's also the challenge there that efforts might get lost in the melting pot of the city, right? Whereas in an area with smaller communities, where you can really leverage the community's love for the mountain, for the natural resources, people in rural areas understand the importance of preserving the natural environment in a different, I don't want to say better, but in a different way than those of us living in cities. You can really bring young people, channel their passion, and work alongside the community to create very interesting and long-term impact.
Niko, I think a great way that we've seen how people that have moved to cities are touched by this is obviously the fires that took place last year. But I remember years ago as well, there was the big Evia fire, and most of Athens that summer was covered in ash. And that's really mobilized a lot of people around this problem of, how do we combat wildfires? How do we take action on the environment? So is this a shift that you're also seeing in your reporting and your research now, whether in Greece or other parts of the world?
No, I want to take a contrarian viewpoint here, and I want to look at the Evros wildfire of Davia, which is a fire that happened away from the main urban cities of Greece. It was the biggest wildfire ever to be recorded on EU soil. It's the main wildfire I'm looking at as a case study from my own research here at Reuters. And recently, while discussing it with a group of Athenian friends, they didn't remember that this fire happened. It has escaped collective consciousness. I think there is a selective sensitivity when fires hit closer to home, and I have to tell you that actually was also it reached Alexandroupoli. It came to the borders of the city. But I do think a problem with reporting and public consciousness is we sensationalize the catastrophe, and yes, we do focus on relief. There's a lot of solidarity on relief, but we often forget either more remote regions or the big conversations of whether there's been enough preparedness. And I think in the case of Davia, you see this interesting paradox of wildfires and human activity, where obviously if you have increased human activity, that also poses some risks if it's careless, but you don't want forests to stay mismanaged and unmanaged. And my fieldwork in Davia seems to be pointing to the fact that it was a very abandoned forest area. And even natural areas, there need to be certain preparedness mechanisms in place. So I think there's a shift in people's interests about wildfires, but we need to meet them and also move the conversation to areas that don't get enough attention and to the big questions of preparedness, mitigation, and also rebuilding. The people in Evros feel very abandoned because they feel like even after the wildfire, there hasn't been as much attention as you saw in the Evia region. So I think there's more work that needs to be done. And that's part of the reason why I'm here and I'm trying to learn more about how we can help, the media can help sort of shift that conversation, deepen that conversation a bit more.
Let me follow up with you there just on that, because you said that was in your field work you visited. Can you just give us or set the scene for what it is that you saw, years after the fire wiped out much of the forest?
It's a very strange and puzzling image where you see the main, the trees are still burned. So it's still, there's like a blackness everywhere. But you've started to see the grass pop out. So that's sort of an eerie image where you see a natural regeneration, but the scope and the scale of the catastrophe is beyond massive. I drove for 3.5 hours. I mean, Davia was one of the biggest natural forests of Greece. And to see almost all of it burned out is heart-wrenching, really. From the interviews with the locals, there's a sense of abandonment before and after. And if you talk to people that don't have stakes in the sort of administrative failure of this, but they care about the forest and they know the forest, they will tell you that it was abandoned. And I think one interesting lore here that might spice up the conversation. So the local lore says that in Second World War, when the Bulgarians retreated from the region, they tried to burn Davia and it just wouldn't catch fire because of how moist and dense the forest is. So the years of climate differences, but also abandonment of the forest and all the tools that we could have in our disposal led to, when there was actually a spark, the entire forest burning up. So I'm grappling with that thought a lot.
And Niko, the other part that has happened is that because no Greeks died in the Daria fire, I mean, I think there was only a group of migrants. that were passing through. It didn't really get into the collective psyche. I mean, people expressed condolences, to unknown people. I mean, had there been, deaths, from people from Alexandroupoli, people would have taken it, would still have remembered it quite a bit. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, at the time, there was a little bit of attention paid to the statistic that it was the largest wildfire in the EU, and then completely, totally forgotten, unfortunately.
Costa, it seems that every year there's, some wildfire, and then there are a team of experts, and I'm sure you've been on some of these panels as well, that get together to see, well, what went wrong, what went right. Whether it's in the US and Canada or in Greece, what have we learned from these catastrophes and the way that they're dealt with?
Okay. I think in the US, there are after incident reports that are, fairly comprehensive. So for whatever it's worth, the fairly thick report gets produced by the, by the fire, by the fire department or whoever takes this over. But there is an after incident report that eventually you can look it up and you can find out about lessons learned. In Greece, it's a little bit more ad hoc. It's whoever, every year, finding out the, in some ways, rediscovering the wheel. On the other hand, what has worked in Greece is the fact that there is so much sensitivity in terms of, people dying, particularly after the Mati fires. Remind you, back in 2018, about 104 people died in Mati because there was no warning, there were no evacuation orders, which incidentally, it's exactly what happened 5 years later in Lahaina in Maui. So in Greece, I think most of the lessons that are absorbed have to do with evacuations. And I think in Greece, the evacuations part and issuing the wireless emergency alert is pretty much it's a fairly good level. I want to contrast here what happened in West Altadena during the recent LA fires. In West Altadena, there were no evacuation orders, or rather, the evacuation orders were late, and 17 people died. In Eastern Altadena, they came in on time, and nobody died. So this really needs to be worked. Beyond that, I think the Greek approach has been, not so much in terms of detailed studies, but brute forcing the way. We'll get more firefighters, we're going to get more drones, we're going to get more aircraft. And
we just saw an article in the Associated Press that said that the minister responsible has announced more firefighters, more drones as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but this is exactly this brute force way of actually, addressing it. I fear ignoring the fact that when you have extreme events and extreme fires, no matter how much equipment you have, it's not going to help you unless you're prepared.
Well, preparedness is, I think, a key part of the equation. And Erika, the work you're doing at Mount Olympus has been delivering results there. Can you walk us through what this work looks like in practice, and if you're already seeing this direct impact? And maybe this is something that goes beyond wildfire prevention.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that point from Costas, the human resource is not necessarily a problem, but it's where in the cycle of the disaster you place those human resources and invest them that can make the difference. So wildfire risk reduction is really about, Thanos, you're saying, acting before the crisis hits, and that's mostly the work that is unseen, right? What that means for us, for our team, is clearing fuel loads like dry brush from the forest, maintaining trails to ensure access for emergency crews when response needs to happen, mapping evacuation routes, and engaging communities in awareness and prevention. So in Mount Olympus, let's take that specific community, we work very hard, on one hand, to mobilize youth in wildfire risk reduction on the field within the national park, but at the same time to drive advocacy efforts at the local, regional, and national level with the relevant ministries and stakeholders to secure the public buy-in for scaling this work out of Mount Olympus, as an example, to other parts of the country and to hopefully a national model. So our teams, just to go again to zoom in on the field, what they practically do on the field is, they are trained and they work side by side and under the supervision of the local forestry service and the local authorities to clear the trails, create fire breaks, identify hazards on the field, and run public awareness campaigns, as I mentioned earlier. It's labor intensive, but it's also the kind of work that builds the long-term resilience in the communities that we're talking about. And yes, to answer the last part of your question, we're clearly seeing ripple effects that go beyond prevention of the fires. For one, it's building local capacity. Municipalities, the ones we're working with, who are understaffed, to go back to the issue of human resources, have now trained hands on deck where we can be on the field. It's also creating jobs for the young people that are employed or recruited in our program, because those are paid positions, and pathways for youth into the green economy. So literally upskilling and preparing the green workforce of the future for a more resilient Greece longer term. And maybe most importantly, it's again what I mentioned earlier, it's shifting the narrative where communities are starting to see prevention and preparedness, not just as a government responsibility, but as a shared civic mission, so to speak. I think that's very important.
Well, Niko, since we're on this subject now of lessons learned here, how can the media really help in this effort to, scale up kind of these lessons learned and really get buy-in from the population of Greece or any other population where there are countries where there's wildfires, to get them in the field or get them to support different, responses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I've been spending 6 months and I have more questions than answers, but I'll give you some of my thought process here. First of all, we can't treat it as an emergency anytime it happens. We need to have a preemptive storage of solutions and approaches to journalism, and to not reinvent the wheel or chase Mr. Synolakis every time there's a crisis to get a new quote, an expert opinion. There's a lot of knowledge that we have accumulated, and we should have a stored, pre-banked sort of approaches on how we look at wildfires. On the issue of misinformation, which is very rampant in Greece, I think I've been thinking a lot about changing our tonality and fact checking in a way that is inclusive and empathetic towards those we're trying to convince. We need to win the hearts and minds of people, not virtue signal to our audience. So I'm looking a lot at vocabulary and how we can be very descriptive about the links between climate and wildfires, not in a way that sounds like we're pushing a climate agenda down anyone's throat, but in a way that is reflecting, the reality, which it really is. And then I think utilizing local insight is very important. The stories from the people that live them tend to be the most powerful ones. And journalists are very challenged. They tend to report on these things from their newsroom desks, but we need to go to these regions and unearth these stories, definitely. And then I've been thinking a lot as well about popularizing this sometimes counterintuitive wildfire knowledge that we all have. We discussed a lot of these paradoxes here, trying to find metaphors, trying to find simple language, vertical videos, you name it. But we have to get this information out there where people consume information and where misinformation also thrives. But I think beyond all of this, for this preemptive approach to work, we need partnerships. We need partnerships with the experts. We need partnerships with civil society. We need to be having workshops every year, training our journalists on what are the kind of explainers they should put in, what are the kind of approaches they should have, who they can call when there is an emergency. We're having one of these discussions here. We should have more of these discussions connecting the media and the Greek journalists with the ecosystem. We have a wealth of knowledge in Greece. We have a wealth of solutions, lots of interesting stuff on Earth observation and satellite data that I'm looking at how we can embed those to the newsrooms as well. But we need cooperation.
Since you've talked about, combating misinformation, let's do, a quick round of myth busting here. What's one of the wildest pieces of misinformation that you've all heard when it comes to wildfires? Maybe Costa, we could start with you, Erika, and then Niko to close
I
this
think
round up.
the wildest, to me at least, the wildest part is that practically after every fire, people are looking for the arsonist. I mean the fire, and I mean in a way that shifts blame to one crazy person that is out there, and shifts blame from the collective responsibility to actually fight the fire, get ready for the fire. People say, oh, there's nothing we can do. Oh, of course there's so much. And that we just heard how much how much effort, I mean how much from the ground you can do. And I think this is something that we need to fight. And I think over time in Greece this has been to avoid the responsibility, the government's responsibility when it comes. I mean, when it was the National Electricity Corporation, now it's a different company that does the transmission, the high power lines. But to shift the blame, I mean, it's always someone to blame, an evil person somewhere that we need to find them and punish them. And next year it will all be fine because I mean these crazy people will be in jail. I think this is great. This is we need to work on that, and this is my pet peeve.
Erika?
I'm going to echo what Costa said, and my favorite aspect of it is when it's linked to geopolitical agendas as well. That's where it gets. Yeah, I think we love a conspiracy theory in Greece, and I think to the point that was mentioned, it's very important that we look at yes, this could be the case, but what are the conditions that we allowed to happen that enabled the culprit to operate? If that's the case.
Niko, your misinformation pet peeve?
I mean, I've looked at so many around the world. I would say the space lasers one, always very interesting and very viral in the US. But I will also finish with a contrarian point here. I looked at the Valparaiso fire in Chile, which is, let's say, the Mati of Chile. 100 people died in an urban area. And the story there initially was that maybe a group of firefighters put on the fire, and all the climate reporters said this is probably conspiratorial. But the research and the investigation showed it was a group of specific firefighters that did it for a combination of maybe an even psychopathy case, but also perhaps some interest. But there's clear evidence and messaging that they put it out, which is to say that even with all of these complex web of mitigation, preparedness, climate that we're talking about, sometimes the most absurd scenario can still be true. So the role of journalists, I think, is to always look at the story, always be impartial, and weave this sort of complex reality with some humility, because at the end of the day, as I said before, we are trying to win hearts and minds. So even though some of the conspiracies sound crazy, we need to win those hearts and minds and direct them to sort of the truth of it all. So that case study has really sort of shocked me and moved me in the way that I think I should advise newsrooms to approach this attribution effect. But of course, to always redirect the conversation, I agree, to the real causes that are deeper than who just lit the match.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we have a pyramid of flammable woods, and we have a climate that is making everything much worse, and mega fires are a risk at all times. It doesn't matter almost who lit the first match.
On this note, I want to take us to our shot clock segment, which our regular viewers know we end every episode with now. You'll each have 24 seconds, like in the NBA, where the shot clock gives you a certain amount of time to take your shot, to answer a question. And you'll each have the same question. And I think we can start off with Costas, and then we'll go with Erika and wrap up with Niko again. As we look ahead at the summer, what's one thing you think that we should all be aware of, or that the government should take action on to put us on a path towards a wildfire-free summer?
The main part is preparedness, trying to go and make sure that the forests are clean. I mean, there is less fuel, and really spend time in preparedness. I mean, for me, it is the number one. We need to make a shift from firefighting to preparedness.
Erika?
I won't be very original. Preparedness, prevention, invest in it with the same urgency we invest in response. By the time the fire starts, it's already late. Prevention is quieter, but far more effective, as we've analyzed here. And that means funding local crews, engaging youth, supporting civil society, and above all, educating the next generation to be climate ready. That's the long-term solution.
Niko?
I think preparedness is key, but part of preparedness is revisiting the regions that have been affected by wildfires the most. So I think one thing we could do in advance of this season is go have the conversations with the communities affected by the previous fires of the past 5 years. See what insight they have and look at the entirety of the field here, not just the fires that we most remember.
Thank you all for joining today. It's been great chatting with all of you. And to our viewers, give us a share, leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and let us know, more importantly, how you plan to take action ahead of this summer season. If you're in Greece, especially, or places like California, where wildfires are prevalent, so that we can make sure this is, in fact, a wildfire-free summer. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.